make you feel kind. We're gonna have a good time. Let's get the meaning down. We're gonna spread being nice around. You just go right ahead, because it's here and it's now. Just move every bone to a cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Toward a Quality of Life. We're in the fall of almost fall of 1997, and tonight I'm going to talk about a couple of very major important things that I, from time to time, keep renewing in my appeal to try to reason and get persons to think about and become more conscious of the animals, for number one, and the environment, for number two. Animals as they are held in captivity or held in experimentation, or mistreated in the many ways, shapes, and forms, and therefore have torturesome lives, and the environment as a very dire circumstance that gets aggravated day by day. Now, even if we don't care about ourselves, we really don't have a right to not care about animals and nature and the environment, and especially to not torture animals. Also, regarding the environment, it is so seriously amiss that a lot of time, unfortunately, must be taken to constantly try to bring home the message for us to be paying more attention and to be acting with greater urgency on this critical matter indeed. Personally, we are live tonight, and sometimes we do have a live call-in show, but I'm told that the phones will not be working this evening, but we may later be able to post a phone number in later editions of this show, so that if you would like to give us comments or questions, I love to hear them. Please call later when you are able to see a phone number and let us know what you think, or what questions you have or comments you'd like to make. Now, the things that I'm talking about, animals and the environment, I'd like to bring to you in a plain English. We'll also be touching on science as well, and I'd like to bring it forward in just a straight ahead way. It's serious stuff, and somebody's got to do it. It's got to be spoken about in a very direct, forthwith manner. I noticed in preparing for this show, as the weeks and the months go by of my life, as the years go by, I realized how from years ago, over time, I'm being conditioned to not care, not in the sense that I'm not motivated and that it doesn't matter to me, but that my behavior is becoming more automatonic and more robotic and more two-dimensional or one-dimensional, and resigned to the realities that are around us. We are indeed, to a great extent, becoming more dull and lifeless as we accept and remain passive to our birthrights and some very egregious life circumstances. I also would prefer to be talking about major issues of science, problems in science today, critical issues of science, of where it is going awry and how it has changed from what it originally was intended to be. Also, speaking with a colleague the other day, we had a very nice conversation about cultural engineering, or the idea of how do we get more equity, how do we redistribute and balance and pay somehow more distributive attention to all the interests that are competing and conflicting with each other in this culture of ours and in the world at large. But again, we go back to the animals and the environment, because these two are so pressing, they're right at the doorstep, and time and again they must take the immediate attention. Now, I have done many writings in my time. However, I've not been prone to necessarily always promulgate what I'd like to do or say in writing, because I do believe today we are computer bound, we are cyberspace bound, we are television bound. We would probably profit more from an oral history. So this is another motivation to bring things to you orally in plain English and to pass them on from person to person in real time, rather than to write perhaps something narrow or even not so narrow, but especially narrow and specific, and let it be circulated amongst only a small cadre of persons and mainly remain on the shelf at large when it comes to the real culture that is happening across the land and across the world. Regarding writing and the issue of science and psychology, I do have a book called The Psychology of Human Life, which does contain some of the ideas that I will from time to time be bringing up, and which also contains a very deep critique of science as we know it today, a lot of information about which will become more and more in vogue in general as time moves on. Now, first to the animal issues. I'm looking here at something I see in a paper called the Massachusetts High Tech in June 1997, and I see the headline reads that animal rights activists are sick over the production methods of getting monoclonal antibodies with animals. When a company is small, apparently, it has a much greater chance of using animals as a cheaper way than a cell culture, as can be done by larger enterprises. And as I explained in a previous show, when an animal is prepared for a tumor to grow, out of which cells can be gathered and antibodies thereby gotten, the animal has injecting an oil into it that will cause inflammation, discomfort, and pain. I mean, that's not why the oil is injected, but in order to prep for the tumor to grow, they have an oil injected first of all, then the tumor is grown, and then the tumors are punctured as they may swell or become obviously too detrimental to the animal, all of which has to be so devastating. And I say this to you to point out that animals are still being used in such grisly ways. Thank goodness it's not you or I. Being used in such grisly ways, having very uncomfortable injections put into them to prep them to receive tumors, and then having tumors grow and having tumors punctured as necessary, and so on, in order to cultivate cells and the antibodies, which is part of research for cancer. Again, people will say, well, we need the research for cancer, but the immediate event to the animal is great suffering and torture, and though we won't go into it today, there are so many whys and wherefores about how we could conduct medicine and how we could indeed, even without medicine, conduct ourselves to do more about cancer. Again, we also see recently, we know in this country and in many countries and in this state, there have been great fights against what's called the leg hold trap, and I'm going to put some pictures up here. Maybe the cameras can focus in and get some of these. And again, now before the European, United States, Canadian, world organizations, the issue came forward as to whether they would allow the leg hold trap after it apparently had been banned. And if any of you know the answer to what occurred, I don't know how that has come to pass, but this trap of catching animals is still under discussion, still being pushed by certain parties to be used for fur, for trapping, and so on. I'm getting directions here from my crew. And as you will see, many innocent animals, not only the ones whose fur we want to capture, suffer from this, but what about the ones whose fur we want to capture? And they often chew off their limb if they're there long enough, leaving the limb behind to free themselves. And of course, they must often ultimately bleed to death, what many pets have been victims of. Also, what continues is global trade in animals. Unbelievable. For legal purposes and for illegal purposes, global trade in monkeys, in any kind of animal, exotic birds, snakes, lizards. Let's have a look. Maybe we can take a picture of these two monkeys waiting as they are going to be shipped somewhere in this world. And as you know, the mothers are often killed in order to get a hold of the babies in the primate kingdom. That's how the babies become vulnerable without the mother to fend for them. An awful lot of shipping of animals is going around this world. Why are we allowing, monkeys to be shipped in crates, even for legal purposes? Why are we allowing them to be bred in captivity even and shipped around the world? How ridiculous is this? And many, many times they come very ill in the airplanes that deliver them. Many times they come dead, suffocated in the cargo holds that deliver them. I've written many a letter to airlines after hearing of disasters where they open the cargo to a whole load of monkeys and they're all dead. And other species as well, and birds packed in crates in very horrific circumstances. Why aren't they allowed to remain in their habitats? What kind of sort of craziness is it to be shipping animals around the world? Please, let's leave them in their habitats and let's leave life alone. Then, regarding animals, I'm thinking of the very tragic story that occurred here in Boston with the horse that was pulling a buggy for people who take rides around town in a horse and buggy. And the buggy was rammed from the rear near Faneuil Hall, apparently, and the horse got very frightened and ran and then impaled itself on something from the carriage and had to be put to death. What a tragic situation. What a tragic situation that right here in Boston, horses have to go in the traffic. Would you ever be walking with blinders or without in the traffic with someone taking care that cars stay away from you? Would a human unsheltered ever be doing that? How stressful and sad must this be for the horses? And shouldn't we ban this kind of activity in the city of Boston? Someone commented from one of my previous shows when I was talking about animals that couldn't believe that I didn't value using animals for research. And after all the ways that I tried to explain why this is not a good thing to do, not a correct thing to do, and I'd like to say that the way that I value animals, not to put them on a pedestal, not to give them a special position, but I value them as beings and as creatures and as life. And what happens to them when they are experimented on or kept in any grueling circumstances while they live, while they can feel it, is like a concentration camp. What we have is concentration camps for animals, the virtual reality of what they are living through. And they are living in pain because they feel pain. They scream at the things that happen to them. They try their damnedest to get away from what is occurring to them. And I think the practice of coercing them, injecting them with cancer and cutting them up and taking parts out of them and giving them diseases and watching them wither away in pain, I think this is barbaric and primitive and unevolved and ignorant and arrogant and self-deceiving and cruel and inhumane and base. And that would be the value that I put on animals and where my value stands. Another thing regarding animal research is increasing use of bears for research. Unbelievable. Yes, the big, great bears and all kinds of bears who need so much space to roam and are so magnificent and are in many cases dwindling rapidly. Why do we need to bother the bears, incarcerate them, wake them from their hibernations, test them, biopsy them, study them, measure them, confine them? Isn't this a travesty to the great glory of what is a bear? If we really wanted to rever life, would we not give allotted territory in Alaska and in the Rockies and wherever the bears still occur, that they may have the adequate space so that they will not be the killer bears that scare people, and let us have this glorious miracle of nature continue to exist and be the beautiful spectacle that it is. Wasn't Valdez enough for the bears? The bears were sleeping when Valdez happened. And what happened when the polars came down to get their salmon? And all the water was polluted. What happened to the polars after Valdez? And what happened to the generations they gave birth to, or the sicknesses they had to live with from the oil that they likely ingested? I saw a show not too long ago with a representative of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and this representative was pointing out that animal research regarding science is bad science, because clinical tests must be done with humans. They cannot be done with animals, and many, if not most, of the great knowledges come ultimately from clinical testing with humans. And the physician interviewing this other physician was thinking how defenseless animals are and reminiscing to his days in medical school when he was cutting up a dog that they had killed to use, and he thought how defenseless this dog, and how he dealt with it was just to put it out of his mind, which is the way we deal with a lot of this. In sum, please help animals. And as we continue this show and come towards the end later on in this hour, I will put up 2 addresses for you, giving you 30 seconds of time for each approximately to be able to take down the addresses and write to these people to become involved. One in the Society for Protective Animal Legislation, which works in Washington to make sure laws do not go against animals and try to further them favorable to animal protection, and another which is a protection league for primates, the International Primate Protection League in South Carolina. The people who are in these groups are extraordinarily devoted. Now we'll turn to the environment, and I think one of the big reasons why we do not have more urgent cognizance, more sense of an emergency as we walk around and live our lives about the environment, is that we don't go outside very much. We're at computers, we're indoors, we may even be in facilities where we don't see the outside. So I say, go outside as much as possible, even for your own mental and physical health. Live, smell, taste, hear, explore the outside so that we can carry in our guts what we're really part of, the roots of our sustenance, the mother that is nature, the planet that is ours, the planet that is Earth, which has the oxygen and water and everything else that we need to survive, and which can mathematically be shown to be using up its resources in an exponential, practically exponential fashion, so that you can mathematically add each of the various things we need to live or need for life to be appropriate, and at the rate they are going now, see what the fate is of us into the nearby future. One of the things we definitely need is many, many trees. So plant trees, love trees. When you see trees come down, feel very sorry. Trees help us to breathe by exchanging the carbon dioxide which we expel and utilizing this for their photosynthesis. They're very useful in the regulation of our air quality. They're so useful when it gets unbearably hot and you can sit under a tree. And as our weather will have more extreme scorching days, you will know the beauty and benefit and glory of a tree. And they're so gorgeous to look at, and they give us optimism. They're pretty, they're nice. I'll put these papers down. Now, in turning to the environment, first I will start with an article from Harvard Medical School and public health schools in a magazine newspaper they published called Focus. And this is from the July 97 issue. It says, advocates for the environment take the show on the road. Drs. Shivian and Paul Epstein, Eric Shivian and Paul Epstein, are on a journey around the world to talk about and get people to pay attention to reducing emissions of the famous, infamous greenhouse gases, mainly carbon dioxide, from the burning of fossil fuel, which they say leads to global warming, and apparently more and more scientists are coming aboard the idea that we are having global warming. We will talk about so many floods that ravaged this and other countries this year, which may well indeed be due to melting snows, warmer temperatures, and so on. But on the other hand, as I've said in past times, we also have days that are too cold. We had a period this summer that was inordinately cold, and you have to say, how cold can things get? And there are times in winter where it gets so excessively cold, as it did last year in the Dakotas and perhaps Montana, that people really felt they may have been at the end of the line. So there are so many influences, not just one or two simple ones, causing complex kinds of catastrophe. Oh, by the way, in these times as I'm speaking in September of 97, I am hearing of a hurricane in the Pacific off the coast of Mexico, which is stronger than anything that has ever been seen before. At some part of its formation, having winds of 185 miles per hour. I guess Hurricane Hugo and Andrew perhaps had as much, maybe even more, but something about this Pacific hurricane is stunning the meteorologists. And I'd like to say to the meteorologists, we perhaps should spend less stunned time and more time saying how so many things are excessive and extreme in succession, which could lead us to deduce that this is not just another mark in history. Now, these two persons from Harvard Medical School, as I said, say that the major health effects of climate change are the direct effects of heat waves and increased violent weather from climate change, the spread of infectious diseases. By the way, I've been hearing reports of some of the more deadly, ill-sounding kind of diseases we've come to know and fear through history occurring now in urban areas of developed countries, surprisingly. The spread of infectious diseases, the loss of biodiversity, of course, and where do birds go when it's too cold for their normal patterns of life, or too hot for their normal patterns of life? What happens to them when suddenly they're in an extremely different climate and way too far away and unable to get to the kind of ecology that they need? And bugs and all kinds of animal life. We so far can insulate ourselves with air conditioning and heat, but woe to us as things become so warm or so cold or so windy that even we, with our magnificent technology, will finally, in more massive numbers, admit we may have a moral to the story or the experience that we are part of. These are not natural changes going on with violent weather, infectious diseases. These are man-made and unprecedented, say the two doctors from Harvard. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere now are greater than at any other time in the last 160,000 years. There has been an increase in insect-borne malaria and dengue fever and the growing threat of urban yellow fever. For example, in the 90s, locally acquired malaria cases were identified in California, Georgia, Texas, Michigan, New Jersey, Queens, and New York. and Queens, New York. Dengue was identified in Texas in 1995. While there are many reasons for these occurrences, extreme weather events and warm, wet conditions favor the breeding of mosquitoes, and we're going to talk about melathion and the people of Tampa shortly. We're in essence conducting a global experiment with human life, Shivian says, and nobody can really predict what the outcome will be. That is, he says, unless we take significant steps to preserve the global environment, which we have the power to do. I don't think we have to wonder what the outcome will be. We don't have to wonder. Like I say, it's an arithmetic proposition. More extremes, more damages, more ecological destruction, and more severe stresses on the capacity of human life itself. Now, again, in the May 97 issue of the Harvard Medical School newspaper, we see parents' exposure to poisons may harm unborn children. May. After Love Canal, after Gulf War, after Vietnam, after so many, many events. Scientists have become increasingly aware of the tenacious, meaning long-standing effects of radiation exposure. Preconception exposure to ionizing radiation, one of the few proven human carcinogens, may pose another risk to infants. The director of the Kresge Center for Environmental Health at Harvard and School of Public Health and James Stephen Simmons Professor of Radiobiology discussed the possibility that both children and adults may be at increased risk of cancer and other genetic abnormalities due to a mother's or father's radiation exposure prior to conception. New data derived from studies of children born in heavily polluted areas of Belarus after the 86 Chernobyl accident offers suggestive evidence of this danger. Until recently, scientists lacked a biological model for this phenomenon. The understanding was that all mutations occurred directly at the site of exposure. Now, why should that be? This is how so many of the toxins work in our environment. They don't drop you dead. They don't mutate you. They don't transform you in a day or two or a second. They literally accumulate, devastate, infiltrate, change, redirect, reorganize, and replasmatize, if you will, the way the body operates. This is what happens. And so many toxins are coming into you night and day. You're never free of them, from the air you breathe to what's in your foods, to the fabrics, to the materials and items that we work with and have around us, etc., etc. So you're constantly exposed. And the parts per million are parts in so many things that are adding cumulatively and in combination all the time. And these scientists are talking about a higher incidence of mutation in succeeding generations, not the present one, from being exposed to radiation. And this, of course, increases a person's susceptibility to cancer. There's an awful lot of press lately regarding the latent diseases in the children of the people of Chernobyl. We frequently have different radioactive accidents in this country, in Japan, that I see go by me many times. And they're so numerous. And of course, the information of just what happened when these accidents do occur cannot be known by us, cannot be known for a very long time, and logically, a person would not necessarily go ahead and alert people in a radical way to accidents if indeed there is harmful occurrences happening in these situations. Now next, with the so-called global warming, as I say, only one of many complicated kinds of effects that is influencing us to be in a decided emergency. Floods. Floods across the United States and around the world, and many of them occurring on the heels of drought. In this country I heard, oh, it's worse than or similar to a 100-year flood or a 40-year flood, and yet they're reappearing within the 140 years, but they're called 100-year floods and 40-year floods. Now we see, in April of 97, what a year we've had with floods. People were asking, what percentage of Minnesota is underwater? That's how bad it was. What percentage of Minnesota? And a record crest was expected on the Red River at Grand Forks, North Dakota, to crest at 54 feet, a full 26 feet above flood stage. Most of the 50,000 residents left the city on an order of mandatory evacuation, and the city is a watery ghost town. Meanwhile, residents are adding disease to their list of worries because, remember the cold I referred to that was so severe? During that period, 90,000 head of cattle died who couldn't be fed in the deep snow and incredible bitter cold that made people shocked and worried for their lives. Those 90,000 head of cattle that died in March were still lying in the fields and were being swept up by the floodwaters. This reminds me of biblical episodes where every kind of calamity comes down together, and disease, infestation, and catastrophe besiege human life, all life. Now, a person who was the previous head of the Federal Emergency Assistance Agency was speaking not too long ago and asked about the severity of these emergencies that the government has continually to bail out. And he was saying, decidedly over the last 5 years, the money has been much greater. He doesn't know where it's going to come from in the future. In fact, the new budget that has been passed does not carry with it any parts that would make available or include in its budget funds for federal emergencies. So anything that happens in the near future and on must be additional to the budget that recently was passed. So from the point of view of emergency services, the amount and the frequencies are growing. In July, no, again in April, this is interesting, CNN reports in northern Minnesota that the waters were well above the floodplain level, even for floods occurring every 500 years. Again, as I say, it was still called a flood that happens every 500 years, though apparently it has happened supposedly in the last 500 years, so how could it be a 500-year flood, or a 40-year flood, or a 100-year flood? In July, they say flood death toll mounts in Colorado, 8 inches of rain in a 5-hour period. 8 inches of rain in a 5-hour period. Triggering a flash flood in a mobile home park carried residents and trailers unsuspecting as far as 700 feet. In Poland and Germany, terrific disaster this year, tremendous disaster. Perhaps even in Italy, I can't recall, so much disaster with floods. And in Chicago, a repeat of the highs, though not as bad as the previous time, that could kill people, a kind of heat that made the city go into an alert and round up people and bring them to shelters. In July, North China suffers worst drought in recorded history. How many recorded histories do we read before it's off the table, it's off the chart? The Yellow River, the worst drought in recorded history in North China, as the Yellow River is parched by scorching sun and drained by rampant development. The irony that on the one hand you have the drought and on the other you have the floods occurring successively or simultaneously. Some species of fish facing extinction. Expanding dry areas make the region prone to sand and wind erosion. The drought comes as devastating floods rage across southern China, inundating crops, destroying homes, and torrential rains continue to fall in the area. Remember California a few years ago when they had a lot of fires occurring. Was it in the LA area? And also earthquakes happening. So they had water mains broken, water spewing all over the place, and fires burning for which they had no water. No water, no water pressure. July. Pesticide spraying to combat medflies resumes in Tampa, Florida. Beginning even perhaps before June, I see they resprayed in June, so it's even occurring in June and maybe before. They sprayed and sprayed to kill the medfly, which would kill the crops all around Tampa, Florida. And they sprayed with a chemical called melathion. And melathion damages the respiratory and nervous system of insects, all insects, of the fly, of the goodly insects, of the other creatures, and of human life. And people had to endure, because so much financial amount was at stake to the growers in the area. People had to endure repeated sprayings of the chemical melathion. Finally, because they saw that fish were turning up dead and the water was having samples of melathion, that amounts that it shouldn't have, they decided they'll spray and try to exclude the water, and they widened the buffer zone around the water. But as the environmental officer said, it's still going to get in the water. It's impossible to spray around it. Now, if and when these people or their generations after them get cancer, get some other kind of disease, who is liable? How do you even begin to know that these sprayings cause you what kind of... The body is such a physiologically complex organismic machine that it's virtually impossible to go in and detect literally at the time this is occurring the degree and kind of damage that is occurring. And yet, as time goes on, who can be liable from all these multiple inputs, toxic inputs, that are giving us cancers and diseases in numbers that we have never seen before? Regarding nuclear power, which we do not need, which we should not have, in July in Paris, a small zone on the English Channel, near the world's largest commercial nuclear reprocessing plant, was closed off because our friends Greenpeace were showing repeated readings of high radiation in the area. It also included a beach area of 1.7 kilometers in front of the plant. So the region was convulsed in the debate over discharge from the plant. Imagine, radioactive discharge, imagine. And we just heard what happens from radiation. And they also have a study that disclosed the leukemia rate among children who reside near the plant that is 3 times higher than the national average. We talked once about studies and the difficulty of really reading studies and how studies are done and so on. Shouldn't the study be to just think and look right before your very eyes and to know something that is so toxic that were you exposed to it directly or in a certain amount, you'd be dead you are taking in small amounts, in furtive amounts, in random amounts, and continual amounts. Direct empirical knowledge. We don't need studies. We need to be direct observers and thinkers about our lives. In July, Japan had an oil spill. Oil spills. I last read there were 10,000 oil spills in this country alone every year. Small ones, relatively, of course. None is small to be that many. The accident occurred because the ship veered off course and scraped the reef in shallow waters. It doesn't say if it was a double-hulled tanker, and I'm not sure that double-hulled tankers are required to be the only kind used yet. I believe that's coming in the future. They could not hold back the oil from spilling onto beaches in the area with some 26 million inhabitants. The slick washed ashore at Yokohama and Kawasaki, polluting rich fishing grounds in the waters off Kisarazu, Chiba Prefecture, and adjacent to Tokyo. Japan's worst oil spill was in '71 when a tanker spilled 6,000 tons of crude into the Niigata Bay on the Japan Sea. In January, an incident happened where 5,200 tons of heavy fuel spilled from the capsized Russian tanker Nakoda. How much oil can spill? How much oil can the fish withstand? How much oil can our water withstand? How much radiation from nuclear submarines can the water withstand? How can organisms that live in the water withstand minor temperature changes from events of radioactive spills? May. Oil spill from Texaco. 5,000 barrels of oil from a broken pipeline underneath Lake Barr off the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, southwest of New Orleans. And by the way, the oil companies, Exxon, Texaco, British Petroleum, I'm trying to think of the great ones, they're not coming to my mind. Some are so mighty, the biggest companies in the world. They are doing fabulously. Fabulously. Their stocks continue to appreciate. They're steady. Some of them may pay dividends. They are doing quite well, thank you. They are a place where people put their money for a safe, secure, steady portfolio. The stocks are doing well. The companies manage these things and sail right along. But we continue to have pollution and cancer. Can't we know better? If we were to pollute but a tiny well, but a tiny pool, but a tiny part of some water or area near our home or at our home, we'd be prosecuted. By the way, a ruling came down that Exxon owed $5 billion for Valdez. Remember Valdez? To my mind, there is no price on Valdez. But Exxon is in the courts appealing that award as excessive. Again, when I see on TV, how sad, it ran for a while in the early summer on many channels and then stopped for some reason. Maybe there were protests. Monsanto, I believe they may still have some operations in this state. A chemical maker, a very big chemical maker. I think they recently sold their chemical concerns to be involved now in bioengineering, bringing you new kinds of plants that carry mutations in their genes so that insects which eat them perhaps will die, good ones and bad ones, and maybe humans, who knows. But this company, Monsanto, had a weed killer called Roundup that you sprayed from a bottle, and many channels carried the ad. A beautiful daisy or some nice natural weed was in a lawn, and they'd show, spray this sucker and just kill it, shrink it right to the roots. How perverse is that? people filling their yards. And then, on the other hand, science did a study, and we have these questions about studies, of course, saying, people, be careful of your children, because when they go on the grass, they pick up toxins, they bring it in on the carpet, or people do, in general, and then the kids are crawling, and there was a warning about the kids crawling on carpets because they pick up the toxins on the grass. Now, I'd like to say, rather than kill that poor daisy, by the way, you can make delicious soup from daisies, and we purchase dandelion greens in the organic and not organic food stores to eat. And here we are going, kill that sucker, shrink those roots to the core. I think a good lesson would be to go over to the weed killer and dare to think what it would be like to spray the weed killer into our mouths, or to be on, nobody try this, of course, I'm making a point, or to go to the fields where the crops are being sprayed and sit there with your mouth and eyes open and let yourself be sprayed. That's the lettuce you're eating. That's the cabbage you're eating. The poison is pouring down. Oh, there is so much more just on environment, we can't even begin to cover it. I think I probably will end here for the moment with just one more piece to show you. While these very deleterious situations run rampant and increase, cause death, cause sickness, cause ill health, cause asthma, cause cancer, we are worried about stock appreciation and lacks of liability, and we are worried. It's okay to worry of these things, but should we not see the fuller picture? Do we want cancered children but rich portfolios? While we are doing all this, here's what we as a nation are spending our time on, samples of what we take the time to put millions of dollars into. Just one of many kinds of samples. All kinds of budgets, very intelligent minds putting their best efforts forward to think of how to print this, how to write this, how to talk about Charmin triple roll, how to attach the rolls to a car and make the tissue show that how to climb a mountain and have the tissue roll down much longer, how to compare different textures of toilet paper, how to feel good, one commercial has, because your toilet paper is softer. I'm looking at people as I say this with everything else that I said. Here's where we're going. Here's where the money from our wallets. Here's where if we don't go to court and challenge, and if these trial lawyers who are so bad don't get their chance to challenge what's going on, here's where all the dollars are going and continue to go. Here's what we can be. It's charming. At this time, I'll sing a song which I composed, and the name of the song is Planet Earth. Destruction, we will not spoil. to swim, the birds to fly, the plants to grow, the lawn to mow, the grass to sow. We want it now, we keep it pure. It is for life and life endures. So no destruction, we will not spoil. Oh yes, we love nutritious soil. We love the life we breathe within. We want the fishes all to swim. No other planet can compare. Deliver water, give us air. We love our planet, Mother Earth. We're gonna keep our gift of birth. Radiation across our nation for corporation. Yeah, planet Earth. Mommy, I want my mommy. We need our mother. Yeah, planet Earth. One more thing before we roll our video to go out of the show. And this is another toxin which we should not be recycling. We should merely stop manufacturing plastic. Plastic, the choker of life. So please let us take a look at all the plastic that we have befouling the environment day by day. Let us look. Imagine the landfills. Please, let us get the cameras on all the plastic, all the unnecessary plastic upon plastic upon plastic. People, I say good night to you. Thank you for watching. Please tune in again. And until then, as many of you say, cosmic powwow.
It's fun and it's one, it's us cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow. Cosmic powwow.